From the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina, this is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, presented by A Cloud Guru, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. You know, one of the things that Aaron and I have always talked about on the show is, you know, the main purpose of this podcast has always been about educating people, about trying to help them understand new technologies and new trends and so forth. And we've always had this thing in the back of our mind where, you know, a long time ago, when you wanted to learn new technologies, you had to cobble together a lot of stuff. People had home labs, they cobbled together hardware and software and a lot of different things. And we've always wished that it was really, really simple to just like fire up your browser, you know, start doing some stuff on the internet and make learning possible. And you know, we'd kicked around ideas about it in the past and never really executed it on. And the good news is today we're going to talk to somebody who actually went and made that possible and is making it very, very cool. So very excited to have Ben Hall, who is founder of Ocelot Uproar, which is ultimately the creator of Katacoda. So Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to join.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background before we jump into Katacoda. Tell us a little bit about your background and sort of what drove you to creating this online environment that's got people so excited.
Certainly. So before Katacoda, I was a developer working on quite an interesting project. It was doing some machine learning. It was trying to identify and predict failures before they happened. And so it was designed to be very intensive in terms of workloads and the amount of data being produced. And this was in the very early days. There was no Kubernetes as such, or what we know Kubernetes is today. Docker existed, but it was in the very early stages. And so I joined this company, I joined this project, and I kind of had a very rapid way of having to learn how to get started. And so that's what kind of drove me to build Katacoda. I had to learn all of these new shiny technologies and new ways of working, and I just didn't enjoy how everyone was doing it at the moment. And so I tried to find something more interesting. Yeah. And so I've been around for a while. Before that, I've been Node.js developers. I've been a software tester. I've been first-line tech support. I've done the kind of different rounds of the different stages of software development.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we love talking to people who ultimately create, the technology they create or the product and service they create ultimately was kind of born out of a problem that they had themselves. It wasn't just, I analyzed the market. It was like, I need this thing. So let's talk a little bit about Katacoda. To give folks just some really basic background, it's a online environment, online self-paced tutorials, totally browser-based. So imagine somebody says, hey, you know, you should learn about Docker or Kubernetes or Jenkins or something. Instead of having to go build a home lab and wire a bunch of stuff up and run up a big power bill, you just literally fire up your browser. So tell us a little bit about the origin of Katacoda and how you've come about, having these environments for people about all these new cool cloud native technologies.
Yeah, so as I was saying, Katacoda was born out of my own personal frustration. I joined this new project, and I had to learn kind of what we now deem cloud native as a kind of pattern and architecture and kind of thought process to how you scale systems. And so I had to understand how Docker worked. And like at the time, you would think, hey, cool, everyone knows containers. It's all kind of like you just get started. But the documentation and what was available online was pretty light at the time. And it was fundamentally have it installed with boot to Docker on your Mac. Here's how you install it on Linux, and kind of off you go to the races and go with it in production. And very quickly, it realized there was a lot more considerations required than this is containers, off you go. Like, how do you orchestrate containers? How do you run up kind of different environments? And so I started looking at building things like Docker Compose until I realized Docker Compose existed. So, okay, well, that's frustrating, because if I knew that in advance, then I would have just saved myself a lot of time and effort and would have wouldn't have been looking at reinventing the wheel. And so that was the kind of the final straw, which was like, great, I'm going to build a platform which centralizes what developers actually need to know in order to be productive and get the most out of all of these new toolings that are going to be built around this new concept of Docker and containers. And we went from there. And so what we have is an interactive learning and training platform for software developers, and primarily focused on cloud native technologies. So as you're saying, how do you get started running a container, but up to how do you make sure Docker is secure in production and you're running containers securely? How do you scale them with Kubernetes? And how do you do things like actually make Kubernetes production ready and secure and backed up and reliable? And all of these actual moving parts you need to take into account, not just the, hey, you've got a cluster, there you go.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think the beauty of this thing is, the challenge of so many of these technologies is, you watch people at meetups or you watch people at events and they go, hey, let me show you how this cool new technology works, whether it's Docker or TensorFlow or whatever it is. And you kind of watch it and you go, okay, that looks cool. I'd like to get started. I'd like to learn it. And like you said, you read through the docs and then you start playing with a little bit and you're like, oh man, I ran into a problem. I ran into a thing. I wish somebody was with me that knew this stuff, because it like you can easily get frustrated from the, oh, it seems cool and simple and powerful, to I'm stuck on something and I don't know where to go. And, maybe you don't feel comfortable sending a question. You don't know what question to send to a Slack group or something. And these are all very structured. They're, they're self-paced. They're kind of tutorial based and so forth. Let's talk a little bit about, kind of the beyond the browser experience. I mean, what do people need to get started? Everything appears to be free. Everything appears to be within the browser. Is there anything more that people need to get started? To just, like you said, start learning Docker or start learning a little about Kubernetes or whatever it might be.
No, not at all. We've focused very much and have kept a very clear focus on trying to remove all of the barriers to learning. And so we don't charge. We don't, on many of the courses, we don't even ask for an email address or sign up. You can just jump straight in and you are given a complete environment. And so that's been at the heart of what we're trying to build. And that's also representative about some of the advantages of having this browser-based or browser-accessible environment, where we can tie in the dependencies and the configuration with the content itself. So instead of looking at a getting started guide or something on Stack Overflow or Pluralsight, for example, which may be out of sync or outdated, with Katacoda, you know that the two are always in sync. And so you know that as you're going through the materials, the environment is that correct version to match. So you're reading the documentation on Kubernetes 1.10, you have the 1.10 environment there, pre-configured, ready and waiting for you. And so, again, it removes some of that background noise, the consideration processes about getting started, and lets you focus on what's important, which is the topic at hand, and focus on understanding the principles, going through, following the steps. It's both structured and unstructured learning. So you can follow the steps and you can see the best practices and the best ways to do it. But if you want to see what's happening under the covers, you have the complete environment. Your root, you have full access, you can poke around and you can look at how Kubernetes manages IP tables if you really wish to, or debug what's happening inside of the API. And if it all goes horribly wrong and you break something, you just hit refresh and you're given a brand new, fresh environment, and you can try again and kind of continue learning, make mistakes, break things, but do it in a nice, safe environment where you're not going to accidentally take down production or staging.
Right. And the thing I love about it is, it's built in very modular ways. So, you can start, take any of the topics. You can start with the most basic things, like just kind of introduction to the thing. How do I get started? And then it kind of builds upon itself. It not only sort of builds vertically. So for example, maybe it's like, how do I get a Kubernetes cluster running? Now, how do I get a highly available cluster running? Now, how do I do more advanced types of things? But it also sort of builds horizontally. So it's, you want to dive into the networking aspect of it, you can do that. You want to dive into, how do I do health monitoring? From an ops role perspective, you can do that. How do I play with something like Helm, which is very more application centric and application templating. You can play with that. So I love that aspect of it is you can kind of customize the learning to what you want to do. And like you said, it's structured enough that you don't have to worry that you're going to blow something up. You also don't have to worry that, I spun up some resources on AWS to sort of learn this stuff and I forgot about them. And, like a month later, you get a bill for $600 or something that you were like, I forgot I had spun up.
I've been there and did that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I look through the topics that are on there, there's a lot of things that are kind of core basic things. So, Docker and Kubernetes and Prometheus. But there's also a few that are sort of vendor specific. So for example, Weave from Weaveworks has some things on there. The Red Hat OpenShift team has some things on there, which is my team and my day job and others. Like, what's the interaction between who's building these things? Obviously, I would assume the vendors are building some of those, but who else is building them? And are there, is this kind of community driven? Do certain modules come in from the community or how does all that sort of work together?
Yeah, so it's an interesting mixture. And so there's lots of different viewpoints and experiences which go into building out the Katacoda content. So primarily, a lot of the content which you see on katacoda.com was originally created by myself. So this was my own experiences or talks which I was delivering at conferences, workshops which I was delivering, which then I was producing the content and then making it available for free on Katacoda. And so that allowed us to bootstrap a lot of the materials which you see on the core foundations. So like if you're interested in service mesh, then there's Istio content. If you're interested in Kubernetes, then we've got all the getting started guides, etc. We've also kind of explored into certain verticals, like how do you run a .NET application or a Java application within these environments and within these toolings. And then as kind of Katacoda started to become more reliable and as patterns emerging, this is when we started speaking to, as you pointed out, different vendors like Weaveworks and Red Hat and storage companies like StorageOS and many other companies, and kind of helping them showcase what makes their products interesting, showcase how their products work, and making it in a fun, interactive way. So building on top of the underlying platform, but having it very targeted to what their tooling requires and how to showcase it in the best possible light and actually get to the heart of why it's important and why it matters to developers and why developers should be aware of it. And so OpenShift is a great example. That started as kind of a little prototype and it's like, cool, we've got OpenShift running on top of Katacoda. And so within a couple of seconds, you would have an OpenShift cluster to play around and learn with. And then over time, the different teams have taken different use cases or different situations that they're discussing and talking about and demoing anyway, and moved them and create additional interactive content alongside what they're already producing. And so this is where we saw people starting to write Istio content on top of OpenShift about how do you combine these two great technologies and get the best out of both sides. And instead of having to worry about the infrastructure, you just let Katacoda take care of all of that. And then they can repurpose the content which they already have. And it's a great way to combine these two different kind of experiences, the knowledge and product experts building and producing all of the content, and then we can focus on scaling the platform, making sure it's reliable, making sure it's secure and everything. And then companies don't have to reinvent the wheel about how do they manage their trial or training environments, for example. We can take care of all of that for them.
Right.
And now, as over time, we're slowly seeing more community content be produced on the platform. Anyone can go on and start creating content and repurpose our existing environments. So if you want to start writing content on top of Kubernetes, for example, you can go onto Katacoda and create your own profile and just start producing these interactive materials and interactive ways of learning and showing different toolings and different techniques, which has been great to see. The community's come up with some really interesting concepts, particularly around things like serverless and kubeless, which we haven't had to get involved in, and the community has kind of just taken it and kind of ran with it themselves, but also beyond cloud native. So we've had Barbara Fasinska, who works at Google. She's produced lots of content around machine learning, TensorFlow, using R, NLP, Python, all of this amazing content, which has equally the same problems as cloud native. It's like, how do you set up the infrastructure? How do you run very large machine learning workloads without having a very powerful machine? And so she's been using Katacoda to solve that problem, which has been great, which has been great to see and very interesting to learn from.
Yeah, no, and that part is very cool because ultimately there's content out there that's a mix of, if you're more on the operational side of things, like we mentioned, the Dockers and OpenShifts and Kubernetes and other things are there. If you're kind of DevOps oriented, there's things like Jenkins and and GitHub and some of the tooling you're going to need around automation. And then, like you mentioned, for developers, there are things specific to languages. So R, Golang's out there, Java's out there. So it's a really good platform for everybody. And I know myself, being on the OpenShift team, we use it all the time. I mean, two scenarios we use all the time is we run a lot of, interactive events where people will come out and want to do hands-on learning and instruction. And we're able to spin up environments. Not even have to spin up environments, but just literally tell people, hey, just bring your laptop with you. You don't have to download a bunch of things ahead of time. We don't have to worry about, did we get capacity planning right for this event? It's 100 in Toronto, but 250 in New York City. You just do it. But also we can have a sit down meeting with a customer and tell anybody who's in that room or on their team, like, hey, you can start playing with this. And oh, by the way, if you're not familiar with even the basics, so like in the case of OpenShift, it's like, well, you probably should know a little bit about containers, or maybe you want to know some underlying Kubernetes. Like, you can go play around with those things first, and they're not dependent on each other. They're not, you don't run into these situations where it's like, oh, my company hasn't signed up for that license yet. You can go be independent and go play with that stuff. So that's, as an example, it's worked out really well, both at a larger community level and an individual level. And we've been incredibly happy with kind of working on it. For folks that are curious, how do you keep these environments running, and how do you make a great experience out of this? What are some of the back-end technologies that you've had to use to make this all come together?
It's been an interesting experience to put together the Katacoda. As I kind of described at the beginning, like, we started Katacoda when the whole kind of space was very early. And so kind of probably the first 6 months of Katacoda was literally working around issues. Things like containers wouldn't always 100% start as you would expect because there was such early technology. And so we had to build in a lot of custom kind of aspects to the platform, which ensured that no matter what's happening, the user gets that great experience, and we can firefight under the covers and spin wheels and work around potential issues or potential bugs within underlying platforms. And so that was a lot of interesting experiences and built a lot of experience in just kind of what is happening under the covers. And so at the time, we had to build our own schedulers. Kubernetes was coming along very nicely and was definitely building momentum, but I wouldn't say it was ready for us to put it into production at that point in time. It definitely wasn't where it is now. So we kind of took inspiration from that and built something very targeted based on our needs about how do you spin up these environments very quickly, and spent a lot of time focusing on performance. We didn't want to ruin people's motivation by spinning them a wheel for even 60 seconds is enough that you'll get distracted and check your email or go into Twitter instead of kind of focusing on what you're trying to learn. And so we wanted to get it down into that 2-second access time, so that when you really want to learn and you have that excitement, we don't destroy it. And so that's why we spend a lot of time focusing on performance. And then those kind of schedulers are very similar to what you would see on Kubernetes. We spin up different environments based on what you're connecting to. So if you're trying Python or TensorFlow, then you're connected to a container. If you're trying Kubernetes or OpenShift, then it's a virtual machine with some additional enhancements in the covers. We don't want to introduce black magic. We don't want to fake it. We don't want it to be different to what you would be running in production or in a cloud provider like Azure or EC2 or Google. We want you to have that same experience. And so we've had to kind of simulate or kind of like build experiences very aligned to that, just with different focuses. Like, how do you make sure that it's secure when you never asks people for an email address or a credit card, and you give them complete access and root access to a terminal window? Right? You have lots of people trying lots of interesting things to see what they can do.
Right.
Bitcoin mining, obviously, and a few other ones just entertaining and things which we've had to build in order to make sure that we can actually support the platform.
Right. Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Bitcoin mining and other stuff tends to be something you have to be actively looking to make sure people aren't just wasting resources. So very cool. Hey, listen, one last question. I want to be conscious of your time. Where do you see this going? I mean, how far do you sort of think out, or do you have, maybe a bigger picture in mind of where this could expand to? Obviously, you do a lot of consulting yourself. You're over in London, and this can help support, what you do. But do you have a bigger picture of where this might go, or is right now just getting all these things on there a big enough challenge as it is?
We definitely have a bigger picture and our plans. In the short term, it's working with different companies to make sure that we can showcase their products in the best possible light. And so sometimes that means the current experience which you see today, but it may be a different experience and different situations call for different learning approaches. As you're saying, if you're in a workshop and you have an instructor in front of you, your kind of experience is very different to if you're by yourself in the office at your desk. Or if you're delivering a customer demo, then you don't need or want the long-winded explanations, but maybe you do want to call out the script or the major touch points about what you're discussing, but just at more of a high level, and then let the product do the talking for itself. And so we're working on some different experiences to make and showcase that in best possible light. We've added things like interactive quizzes. So when you get to the end of a content, we ask you certain questions to make sure that you were, one, paying attention, but two, also as a refresher. So like, what are the three major things you should be taking away? And so you kind of answer these questions. You can check the environment to see if you are correct, or to get the answer and figure out the answer for yourself. And then when you get all the questions right, you get a nice congratulations, and you can finish that module and move on to the next one. And so we're looking at ways to explore that. And then we're listening to the community. We are heavily engaged with the different projects and the different communities that are in this space. I used to be the organizer of Docker London meetups. We work closely with the other meetups in and around the area, and we see what people's problems are. We see what people are trying to learn and struggling with, and then we want to be there to help and support them. And that's what our focus will be over the next period of time.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, listen, if folks want to reach out to you, I mean, first and foremost, Katacoda.com is the place to find everything. But if folks want to reach out to you, what's a good way to maybe get in touch with you if they have, questions or, want to explore helping you expand it?
Yeah, so email is just ben@katacoda.com, and Twitter is probably the most quickest way to get my attention. So Ben_Hall. You'll find me in there. But generally just search Google for Katacoda, and you can see the various different ways. And whatever works best for you, we have different options, and we look forward to hearing from you. Yeah, very, very cool. And folks, I, as a user of the platform and somebody whose teams build a lot of these things, I can't recommend it any stronger. It's really, it's a really great way to learn, but it's also a really great way to get content out there in a way that people want to use and takes a lot of the friction out of it for them. So, Ben, thank you so much for the time today. Really enjoyed it. Really enjoy the platform, and folks, hopefully you'll get a chance to go out and play around with it if you're learning about new development technologies, new cloud native stuff, new languages, and so forth. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. As always, folks, thanks for listening this week, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more podcasts, show notes, and everything social media. And visit acloud.guru for all your cloud training needs.